The day started like any other, with the usual rush to get ready for work and drop my daughter off at school. But as I sat down at my desk, surrounded by fabric samples and design sketches, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, which I almost ignored, thinking it might be another telemarketer. But something urged me to answer. "Is this Jenna?" a hesitant voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "I'm sorry to inform you there's been an accident. Your parents." The voice trailed off, but I didn't need to hear the rest to know my world had just crumbled. I remember asking for details, my voice sounding so distant, as if someone else was speaking. They were on their way to a quaint little town, a monthly tradition they had. Their car had veered off the road and tumbled down a steep embankment. It was a passerby who called it in, but by then it was too late. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, the phone slipping from my grasp. My mind was a blur, images of my parents flashing before my eyes, their laughter, their love for each other, and their unwavering support for me. It all seemed so distant now. I managed to leave work early, driven by a need to share this unbearable pain with someone who would understand. Derek was the first person who came to mind. My husband, my partner, should have been my solace in such a moment. "Derek, I need you," I said, my voice breaking as I called him. His response was immediate, but not what I expected. "Jenna, what's wrong? I'm in the middle of something." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "It's my parents. They were in an accident. They're gone, Derek, both of them." There was a pause, and for a moment I hoped for words of comfort, a sliver of empathy, but what came was a cold dismissal. "Is that all? Jenna, I'm on a tight schedule here. Can't this wait?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Wait. Derek, my parents are dead. How can you be so heartless?" Another pause, then a sigh. "Look, I'm sorry about your parents, but you know how important this project is. I can't just drop everything. You'll have to handle this on your own." My hands were shaking, tears streaming down my face. "I thought you would care. I thought you would be here for me." "Jenna, we all have our crosses to bear. I'm sure you'll manage. Just don't make this harder than it has to be." The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. I was alone, truly alone. The realization hit me hard. The man I had married, the father of my child, was a stranger to me now. I thought back to the days when Derek would have dropped everything to be by my side. Where had that man gone? How had our love turned so cold and distant? But I had no time to dwell on these questions. I had a funeral to plan, relatives to inform, and a daughter to protect from the harsh reality that her grandparents were gone. As I set about these tasks, a resolve began to form within me. Derek's indifference, his blatant disregard for my feelings, had opened my eyes. I couldn't depend on him, not anymore. This tragedy had not only taken my parents, but had also stripped away any illusions I had about my marriage. It was a painful realization, but one that I could not ignore. The road ahead would be difficult, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to find the strength to move forward, for my sake and for my daughter's. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur. Between making arrangements and comforting my daughter, Lily, I had little time to process my own grief. Derek's absence was palpable, his indifference a constant weight on my heart. But it was during these moments of solitude that I found unexpected strength. My mother-in-law, Elaine, with whom we shared our home, was of no comfort. Her reaction to the news was as cold as Derek's. "So both gone at once? Must have been quite the shock," she remarked dryly, not even looking up from her magazine. I nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes, it's been hard." Elaine finally glanced at me, her gaze calculating. "Well, at least there's a silver lining with the insurance money, right? We could use a bit of good news around here." I stared at her, incredulous. "Elaine, my parents just died. How can you think about money at a time like this?" She shrugged, her interest already waning. "Money makes the world go round, dear. Best to look on the bright side." The lack of empathy stunned me. I had known Elaine to be difficult, but her callousness in the face of my tragedy was a new low. It was clear I was alone in my grief. The day of the funeral arrived, a somber affair attended by close family and friends. The absence of my husband was noted by many, his excuses of work commitments doing little to mask his apathy. It was a slap in the face, a public display of his disregard for our family. After the service, as I stood by the graveside, my cousin approached me, her expression a mix of concern and anger. "I can't believe Derek didn't show up. How could he be so heartless?" I shook my head, fighting back tears. "He says he's too busy with work." "Too busy for his wife's parents' funeral? That's not just busy, Jenna. That's cruel." Her words echoed my thoughts, amplifying the hurt and betrayal I felt. Derek's actions, or lack thereof, were unforgivable. It was a realization that cut deep, severing what little connection remained between us. In the following days, Derek's indifference became more apparent. Calls went unanswered, and when he did deign to speak to me, his words were empty, devoid of warmth or concern. "It's done then? The funeral and everything?" he asked during one such call, his tone casual, as if inquiring about the weather. "Yes, it's done," I replied, my voice cold. Good. Let's move on then. No point dwelling on it." His words were like a knife to my heart. Move on? How could I move on when every day was a struggle, a painful reminder of the loss I had suffered? It was in that moment that I made a decision. I could no longer stay with a man who saw my parents' death as nothing more than an inconvenience, a man who lacked the basic decency to support his wife in her time of need. The thought of divorce had crossed my mind before, but I had always pushed it aside, afraid of the implications for Lily. But now, staying seemed far worse than leaving. Derek had shown his true colors, and they were darker than I could have ever imagined. As I hung up the phone, a sense of clarity settled over me. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and uncertainties, but I was determined to face them head on. For my sake, for Lily's, and for the memory of my parents, I would start anew. Derek had made his choice, and now I was making mine. In the days that followed my declaration, the atmosphere at home became unbearable. Derek's presence, once a source of comfort, now felt like a looming storm, always on the verge of erupting. It was during one of these tense evenings that I decided to confront him about his affair, armed with undeniable proof and a resolve made of steel. "Derek, we need to talk. Now," I said, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. He looked up from his phone, annoyance etched on his face. "What is it this time, Jenna?" "It's about us, or rather the end of us. I know about the affair, Derek." For a moment there was silence, the kind that suffocates. Then Derek laughed, a sound so devoid of humor it sent chills down my spine. "Affair? What are you talking about, Jenna? You're delusional." I held up the photographs, the ones that showed him with her, their intimacy undeniable. "Am I? Then explain these." His face paled as he looked at the images, the realization that his secret was out dawning on him. "Where did you get these?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been lying to me, to us, all those late nights, the business trips. It was all her, wasn't it?" Derek stood up, the mask of indifference slipping. "Jenna, listen to me. It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like? How can you even say that? You've been cheating on me, Derek, on your family. How could you?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration visible in every line of his body. "It was a mistake, okay? It meant nothing. It was just, it got out of hand." "A mistake? Is that supposed to make it all okay? You've destroyed our family over a mistake?" Derek moved closer, desperation in his eyes. "Jenna, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with her. We can go to counseling, do whatever it takes. Please, don't throw away what we have." What we have. The words echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of the love that had turned into betrayal. "Derek, there's nothing left to save. You threw it all away the moment you decided to be with her. I want a divorce, and I'm taking Lily with me." His demeanor changed then, from pleading to angry. "You can't do that, Jenna. I won't let you take my daughter away from me." "Your daughter? When was the last time you even spent time with her?" "No, Derek, I'm going to make sure she's safe and loved, something you obviously can't provide." Derek's anger flared, his voice rising. "You think you can just take everything from me? You'll regret this, Jenna. I'll make sure of it." Regret? The only regret I had was not seeing Derek for who he really was sooner. As I walked away from him, from the wreckage of our marriage, I knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time, I felt truly free, ready to face whatever came next, with my head held high and my daughter by my side. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for a better future, one where betrayal and indifference had no place. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparations and emotional turmoil. Despite Derek's threats and attempts to intimidate me, I pressed forward with the divorce proceedings. It was during one particularly grueling day that I received a call from my lawyer, a call that would shift the balance of power in my favor. "Jenna, we've uncovered something that could significantly impact your case," my lawyer began, her voice tinged with a mix of surprise and satisfaction. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. "It's about Derek's financials. It appears he's been funneling money into a separate account, one that's linked to the woman he's been seeing. We can use this to prove financial misconduct." The news hit me like a bolt of lightning. Not only had Derek betrayed our family emotionally, but he had also been draining our resources, jeopardizing our financial security for his affair. "Can we take action against this?" I asked, my mind racing with the implications. "Absolutely. This strengthens your case for both the divorce settlement and custody of Lily. We'll make sure the court sees the full extent of his actions." Armed with this new information, I confronted Derek once again. This time, I had the upper hand, and I was determined to use it to protect myself and Lily. "Derek, did you really think you could hide your financial deceit from me? From the courts?" I asked, watching as he struggled to maintain his composure. "What are you talking about, Jenna?" he replied, attempting to feign ignorance. "Don't play dumb with me, Derek. I know about the money you've been siphoning off for your affair. It's over. You've lost." The color drained from his face as the realization set in. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, fear of losing everything he had taken for granted. "You can't prove anything," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, but I can, and I will. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done, not just to me, but to Lily. But I see you've endangered her future for your selfish desires." Derek's demeanor shifted from fear to anger, a dangerous glint appearing in his eyes. "You'll regret this, Jenna. I'll make sure you get nothing." But his threats no longer held any power over me. I had the truth on my side, and I was no longer the woman he thought he could control and intimidate. "No, Derek, it's you who will regret it. I'm going to expose you for the liar and cheat you are, and when this is over, Lily and I will be free of you and your deceit." As I ended the conversation, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. For too long, I had lived in Derek's shadow, subjected to his lies and manipulation, but now the tables had turned. I was ready to fight back, to reclaim my life and secure a safe and happy future for Lily and myself. The battle was far from over, but for the first time I felt confident in my ability to win. The courtroom was charged with tension as Derek and I faced off, surrounded by our respective legal teams. The proceedings had been grueling, but today was different. Today, the focus was on Derek's financial deceit and his affair, the evidence laid bare for all to see. "Mr. Thompson, can you explain the purpose of the separate account to which you've been funneling funds from the joint account you share with your wife?" the judge asked, his tone indicating he'd heard enough excuses. Derek cleared his throat, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "Your Honor, that account was for investment purposes. It has nothing to do with the allegations my wife has made." "Investment purposes?" my lawyer interjected, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Is that why there are multiple transactions linking this account to a Miss Rachel Foster, the woman Mr. Thompson has been having an affair with?" The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air. Derek's lawyer attempted to intervene, but the judge waved him off, his gaze still fixed on Derek. "And Mr. Thompson, how do you respond to the charge of financial misconduct, specifically the misuse of marital funds for the benefit of your affair?" Derek's response was a mumbled denial, but it was clear to everyone in the room that his defenses were crumbling. The judge leaned forward, his verdict ready. "Given the evidence presented, it's evident that Mr. Thompson has engaged in financial misconduct, jeopardizing not only the marital assets, but also the financial security of his daughter. This will be taken into consideration in the final settlement." As the judge announced the decision, favoring me significantly in both the financial settlement and custody of Lily, Derek's face was a mask of defeat, but it was his whispered words meant only for me that marked his true downfall. "You've won, Jenna. Are you happy now?" I met his gaze, my response calm and resolute. This was never about winning, Derek. It was about doing what's right for Lily. You brought this on yourself. The courtroom emptied, leaving Derek to grapple with the consequences of his actions. But the victory was bittersweet. While I had secured a future for Lily and myself, the path to get here had been fraught with pain and betrayal. In the days that followed, the fallout from the trial became apparent. Derek's professional reputation suffered greatly, his misconduct in both his personal and financial dealings a public spectacle. Rumors swirled, and soon he found himself ostracized, his career in tatters. As for me, the fight had taken its toll, but I emerged stronger, more determined. With the divorce finalized and Lily's future secured, I could finally begin to rebuild our lives. Derek's downfall was a testament to the consequences of his actions, a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. The journey had been arduous, filled with challenges and heartache, but as I looked to the future, I knew that Lily and I were on the path to healing. Derek's shadow no longer loomed over us, his presence in our lives reduced to a distant memory. We were free to move forward to create a new life built on love, respect, and honesty, and that was the greatest victory of all. The dust had settled on the courtroom battles, and with Derek's defeat, a new day dawned for Lily and me. Our first morning in our new home was filled with sunlight, casting a warm glow over what was a fresh start. But it wasn't just the location that had changed. It was the air around us, now free of the tension that had once suffocated us. As I unpacked a box in the kitchen, Lily came bouncing in, her laughter a melody that had been missing for too long. "Mom, look, the backyard is huge. Can we get a dog now?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I smiled, the idea taking root. "You know, that's a wonderful idea. We'll need a bit of company in this big place." Her hug was tight, filled with a happiness that radiated from her. "I'm going to name him Buddy." The simplicity of the moment, of planning for a pet, felt like a luxury after the turmoil we'd endured. It was in these small, peaceful instances that I found profound relief and hope for the future. Later that day, I sat down at my new desk, the view from the window overseeing the sprawling backyard where Lily was already imagining adventures with Buddy. It was time to refocus on my career, to rebuild not just our personal lives, but also the professional success I had put on hold. As I drafted emails and planned projects, my phone rang. It was a call from an old colleague, offering congratulations and a proposal for a new, exciting project. The tide had turned, and where there had once been uncertainty, opportunities were now opening up. "Jenna, we've all heard about your strength and determination. It's inspiring, and honestly, we need someone like you to lead this project," my colleague explained, her words sincere. Accepting the offer felt like the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. My career, which had once taken a back seat to marital strife, was now a source of strength and independence. In the evening, as Lily and I sat on our new porch, watching the sunset, I realized that this was what true freedom felt like. We had escaped the shadows and found light in a place we could call our own. "Mom, are you okay? You look a little sad," Lily observed, her young face etched with concern. I pulled her close, my heart full. "I'm more than okay, Lily. I'm happy. We've made it through the storm, and now we're here together, and that's all that matters." Our conversation drifted to plans for the house, for Buddy, and all the adventures we would have. It was a simple, beautiful future we were building, one day at a time. Derek's downfall had been a necessary end, a closure to a chapter that had brought us nothing but pain. But in its wake, we found strength and a bond that only grew stronger. As the night drew in and Lily's laughter filled our new home, I knew that we had not just survived, we had triumphed. Our fresh start was more than a new beginning. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of love over betrayal. And as I looked at Lily, her face alight with joy and excitement for the future, I was reminded of the greatest truth of all. In the end, love always wins.
"You can't be serious, Dad," I said, my voice trembling as I stared at him across his massive mahogany desk. My father leaned back in his leather chair, calm and composed as always, and let out a slow exhale. "This is not up for discussion, Catherine," he said, setting his cigar in the ashtray like the conversation was already over. My fists clenched at my sides, but I refused to back down. "So that's it?" I asked, my words sharp. "You'd rather hand everything over to Grant, someone who doesn't even care, than let me prove myself? All because I'm a woman?" He didn't even flinch. "This firm is for your brother to manage, Catherine," he said firmly. "You've done well with your education, and you'll make a fine wife one day, but this is not your place." My name is Catherine Mercer. I'm 26 years old, a Harvard-educated lawyer, and the daughter of Henry Mercer, owner of Mercer and Associates, one of the most powerful law firms in Dallas. My entire life has been about proving myself, excelling in school, debating my way to the top, graduating with honors, so I could follow in my father's footsteps. But standing there in his office, surrounded by the smell of leather and cigars, I felt my world shift. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much I loved the law. To him, I was just his daughter, someone who was supposed to marry well and stay out of the way. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steadier now. "Grant doesn't care about this firm, Dad. He's reckless, he barely scraped through community college, and he has no idea how to run a business. You know that as well as I do." My father sighed, rubbing his temple like I was the one being unreasonable. "Grant will learn. He's my son, Catherine. It's his birthright to take over Mercer and Associates. And you," he paused, his voice softening just slightly, "you have other options. A future that doesn't involve the stress of running a firm. I'm protecting you." I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "Protecting me?" I said, shaking my head. "You're not protecting me, Dad. You're holding me back. I've earned this. I've worked harder than anyone, including Grant, and you know it. But you won't even give me a chance because you're too stuck in your ways to see what I'm capable of." His expression hardened, and I knew I'd pushed too far. "That's enough, Catherine," he said, his voice sharp. "We're done here." I stormed out of his office, my heels echoing through the marble halls of our family's estate. My mother was in the parlor, quietly arranging flowers in a vase. She looked up as I passed, her expression soft but tired. "Catherine," she said gently, "what happened?" I stopped, turning to her with a mix of frustration and desperation. "He won't let me work at the firm," I said, my voice breaking. "He's handing everything over to Grant, and he expects me to smile and accept it." She sighed, her hands stilling over the flowers. "Your father, he has his ways," she said, her tone hesitant. "But maybe it's best not to push him, dear. He means well." I stared at her, stunned. "Means well?" I repeated. "Mom, he's throwing away everything I've worked for because I'm a woman. How can you stand there and defend that?" She lowered her gaze, and I could see the years of quiet submission etched into her face. "I just don't want to see you hurt, Catherine," she said softly. "Sometimes it's easier to let things be." Her words hung in the air, and I realized in that moment that I was on my own. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of my father's words pressed down on me. I thought about everything I'd done to get to this point. Late nights poring over case law, the endless debates at Harvard, the sacrifices I'd made to live up to the Mercer name. And for what? To be told I didn't belong? That my only value was to marry into another powerful family? The thought made my stomach turn. The next morning I was halfway through packing my suitcase when the door to my bedroom creaked open. My mother stood there, her face pale and confused. "Catherine, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her, his brows furrowed in irritation. "What's all this?" he demanded, stepping into the room. "Where do you think you're going?" Grant showed up last, leaning casually against the doorframe, still in his robe. "Packing for a vacation, sis?" he asked with a smirk. I snapped the suitcase shut and stood tall, facing them all. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "Since I'm not welcome at the firm and apparently don't belong in this family's plans, I'm going to find a place where I do." My father's face darkened, and my mother clutched her pearls, looking like she was about to cry. "Catherine," she said softly, "don't do this. Let's talk about it." but I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. There's nothing to talk about. You've all made your priorities clear. My father's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer. Don't be ridiculous, Catherine, he said, his tone cold and dismissive. This is your home. Where else would you go? And for what? To make some sort of point? I met his gaze without flinching. Yes, Dad, I said firmly. To make a point. That I'm worth more than being pushed aside for someone who hasn't earned a damn thing. You made it clear last night that I have no place in your firm, so I'll find a firm that values what I bring to the table. Grant let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're really making a big deal out of nothing, Kat, he said, crossing his arms. You're throwing a tantrum just because Dad isn't handing you the keys to the kingdom? His smug tone pushed me over the edge. This isn't a tantrum, Grant, I snapped. It's me taking control of my life, something you've never had to do because everything's been handed to you. My father raised a hand, silencing us both. Enough, he said sternly. Catherine, you're not leaving. You belong here with your family. I shook my head, picking up my suitcase. No, Dad. I belong somewhere I'm valued, and clearly, that's not here. I walked past them, my suitcase rolling behind me as I made my way down the grand staircase. My mother followed, her voice trembling. Catherine, please don't go, she said softly. We can figure this out as a family. I stopped at the base of the stairs and turned to look at her, the woman who had spent her life swallowing her own voice to keep the peace. Mom, I said gently, I love you, but I can't keep pretending that things will change if I stay. They won't. My father stood at the top of the stairs, watching silently, his face unreadable. Grant leaned against the banister, clearly unfazed, like my departure meant nothing. I opened the front door and turned back one last time. When you're ready to treat me like more than just a daughter who needs to marry well, you know where to find me, I said, my voice calm but firm. Then I walked out, the crisp morning air hitting my face as I closed the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I didn't look back after leaving that house. Within days, I secured an interview at one of the most respected law firms in Dallas. They didn't care that I was a Mercer. All they cared about were my credentials and my drive. When I walked into that office, I wasn't Henry Mercer's daughter. I was Catherine Mercer, Harvard graduate and determined attorney. By the end of the week, they offered me a position, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere for what I could do, not for who I was. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I thrived in an environment where I wasn't constantly being compared to someone else. My new boss, a sharp and modern man named Richard Hayes, took me under his wing. He valued my insight and pushed me to take on more responsibility. Within a few months, I was handling high-profile cases and earning the respect of my colleagues. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself growing up, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. As much as I was thriving professionally, the nights were harder. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, no matter how justified it felt. There were moments, quiet ones, like coming home to an empty apartment after a long day, when the weight of it all would hit me. I missed my mother's gentle presence, even if she never stood up for me. I even missed the chaos Grant brought to the house, as infuriating as he was. But what hurt the most was knowing my father didn't think twice about letting me go. Months passed, and I poured everything I had into my work. The cases were demanding, often leaving me in the office late into the night, but I thrived under the pressure. With each victory, my confidence grew. I wasn't just a lawyer anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. Richard Hayes, my boss, started assigning me to more high-stakes cases, and soon I was gaining a reputation as one of the firm's rising stars. The growth wasn't just professional, it was personal too. I learned to stand on my own, to make decisions without worrying about whether they would please my father or fit into the mold my family had crafted for me. Every step forward felt like proof that I was more than they had ever given me credit for. I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter, I was Catherine Mercer, and I was making a name for myself on my own terms. One afternoon, Richard called me into his office. It was spacious but unpretentious, a reflection of the man himself. He gestured for me to take a seat and leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes studying me intently. "Catherine," he began, his tone measured, "I have a case I think you're ready for. It's high stakes, complicated, and it's going to put you in the spotlight." I nodded, intrigued. "What's the case?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "We're representing a client in a major litigation against Mercer and Associates. They're suing your father's firm for negligence in a contract dispute. The stakes are enormous and the case is gaining attention." He paused, watching my reaction closely. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. "You want me to represent someone suing my father's firm?" I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard nodded. "I know it's personal, Catherine, but that's exactly why I want you on this. You know how Mercer and Associates operates, and you're one of the sharpest lawyers we have. If anyone can win this case, it's you." I took a deep breath, trying to process what he was asking. "Richard," I said slowly, "you realize what this could mean for me, personally and professionally. This isn't just another case. It's my family." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I understand that," he said firmly. "But this is your chance to show what you're capable of, to take on the people who underestimated you and prove them wrong. Think about it, Catherine. This could be the defining case of your career." I sat back in the chair, the weight of the offer settling heavily on my shoulders. "This is a lot to take in," I said, my voice quieter now. Richard nodded, his expression understanding. "I don't expect you to decide right here and now. It's a big ask, Catherine, and I know how personal this is for you." I met his gaze, grateful for his patience. "Would it be all right if I sleep on it?" I asked, my tone more measured. "I need to think about how this could affect everything. Not just my career, but—" I trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Take all the time you need," Richard said, his voice steady. "But don't take too long. We need to move fast on this, and I want you on the team. Let me know by the end of the day tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything at stake. Taking the case meant going up against my father, the man who had dismissed me and handed everything to Grant without a second thought. It also meant going head-to-head with my family's legacy, the name that had opened so many doors for me, even as it closed others. But it also meant proving, once and for all, that I could stand on my own, even if it meant burning the last remaining bridge to my family. For 2 days, I went back and forth, weighing the risks and rewards. I thought about my father's cold dismissal of everything I'd worked for, about my mother's quiet resignation, and about Grant's smug sense of entitlement. But I also thought about the chance to show everyone, that I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter. By the end of the second day, I made up my mind. I walked into Richard's office the next morning, my shoulders squared and my voice steady. "I'll take the case," I said simply. His face lit up with approval. "I knew you would," he said with a grin. "Now let's get to work." The day of the first litigation proceeding arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable as I entered the courtroom. I clutched my briefcase tightly, my heels clicking against the polished floor with every step. My client walked beside me, confident in my abilities, but all I could think about was the moment I knew was coming. As I approached the front of the courtroom, I saw them, my father and Grant, sitting at the opposing table. Their faces turned toward me, and as soon as our eyes met, I felt their shock hit like a tidal wave. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as recognition dawned. Grant's mouth fell open slightly, before he quickly masked his surprise with a smug smirk, though I could see the unease in his expression. I set my briefcase on the table and met their stares head-on. I wasn't going to look away or falter. I was here to do a job, and nothing, not their surprise, not their disapproval, was going to throw me off. For a brief moment, my father's gaze softened, but he quickly composed himself, leaning over to whisper something to Grant. I didn't care what he said. I was ready. As the proceedings began, I slipped into my role seamlessly. Every motion, every argument, every document I presented was executed with precision. I kept my tone calm, my demeanor collected, and my focus solely on the case. When the judge addressed me, I responded with confidence, never faltering under the weight of my father's presence or Grant's smug glances. I wasn't Catherine, the daughter or sister in that room. I was Catherine Mercer, attorney for the plaintiff, and I intended to win. Even when Grant fumbled through his arguments, clearly unprepared, I didn't let it show on my face. I treated him as I would any opposing counsel, with respect but zero leniency. Every time he misspoke or misrepresented a fact, I countered with clarity, backing up my points with solid evidence and case law. My father sat quietly for most of it, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his eyes on me. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to earn his approval anymore. I was there to do my job, and I was doing it well. After a few sessions, it became painfully obvious, at least for my father and Grant, that I was dominating the case. Every argument Grant brought to the table crumbled under the weight of my counterpoints. His inexperience was glaring, and my preparation left him scrambling for answers he didn't have. My father tried to step in once or twice, but even he couldn't salvage the damage Grant had done. The tide was turning fast, and everyone in the room knew it. By the fourth session, their side proposed a settlement. I could see the frustration etched into my father's face as their counsel approached mine with the terms. After a few back-and-forth adjustments, we agreed to a resolution that heavily favored my client. As the paperwork was signed, I caught my father glancing at me from across the room. He looked defeated, maybe even regretful. Grant, on the other hand, avoided my gaze entirely, staring at the table like a chastised schoolboy. I didn't say a word to either of them. My work here was done, and I had proven exactly what I'd set out to. Usually, when a session ended, I would stay behind to wrap up with my client and exchange pleasantries with the other lawyers. It was something I always did, a small gesture of professionalism and respect, regardless of how contentious the case might have been. But this time, there was no opportunity. My father and Grant had already gathered their things and left the room without so much as a glance in my direction. No handshake, no word of acknowledgement, not even a curt, "Well done." It stung more than I wanted to admit. Even after everything, a part of me had hoped for some kind of recognition, some small sign that they'd seen what I was capable of and respected it. Instead, they walked away, silent and defeated, leaving me standing there with the weight of unfinished business pressing on my chest. I took a deep breath, brushed it off, and refocused on my client. I had won the case. That was what mattered. That evening, back at the firm, my colleagues greeted me with applause as I walked through the doors. Richard was the first to approach, clapping me on the shoulder with a proud grin. "Well done, Catherine," he said, raising a glass of champagne. "You were flawless in there. That settlement is a big win for us, and your client couldn't have asked for a better advocate." The team had set up a small celebration in the break room, complete with drinks and hors d'oeuvres. My client even stopped by to express their gratitude, shaking my hand firmly. "You were incredible, Catherine," they said. "We couldn't have done this without you." For the first time that day, I let myself smile. Surrounded by people who valued me for my skills and hard work, I felt a sense of accomplishment that no words from my father or Grant could have given me. This was my victory, and I owned it. Later that night, alone in my apartment, the glow of the city lights filtered through the blinds as I sat by the window with a glass of wine. The adrenaline from the day had worn off, and in the quiet, my thoughts drifted back to my family. I replayed the courtroom moments in my head, the way my father's face tightened with every argument I made, the way Grant couldn't even look me in the eye when it was over. I had expected them to be angry or defensive, but the silence they left me with was harder to bear. For years, I had dreamed of earning my father's respect, of proving to him that I was worthy, not just of his name, but of a place in the firm I had once idolized. And now, even after winning a case against them, I wasn't sure what I had achieved. Did they finally see me for who I was, or was I just a reminder of their failure? The questions lingered, unanswered, as I stared out at the Dallas skyline, wondering if the ties I'd cut could ever truly be mended. The next morning, as I walked into the office, the usual buzz of conversation and ringing phones greeted me. I barely had time to settle in before Richard approached, a curious look on his face. "Catherine," he said, his tone cautious but warm. "Your father is here. He's waiting in your office." The words stopped me in my tracks. "My father?" I asked, trying to keep my expression neutral, though my stomach flipped. Richard nodded. "He came in about 20 minutes ago. Said he wanted to speak with you. Take your time. I'll hold your calls." I thanked him, though my mind was already racing as I made my way down the hall. When I opened the door to my office, there he was, Henry Mercer, sitting in the chair across from my desk, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, though the slight furrow in his brow betrayed something. Regret, maybe? "Catherine," he said simply, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I closed the door behind me, unsure of what to expect. "Dad," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What are you doing here?" He stood up slowly, brushing his hands down his suit jacket as though trying to steady himself. "I came here to talk," he said, his tone measured but serious. "To say some things I should have said already." I walked over to my desk, setting my bag down carefully. "All right," I said, folding my arms. "I'm listening." He hesitated, glancing out the window before turning back to me. "You were brilliant in that courtroom, Catherine," he began, his voice softening. "I've seen a lot of lawyers in my time, some of the best in the business, and what you did, it was remarkable. You were prepared, professional, and relentless. You left no doubt about who the better lawyer was." His words caught me off guard, but I kept my expression steady, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent so much of my life believing that legacy meant keeping things the way they used to be," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "That a son should take over what the father built. I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing Grant to step up, even when I knew deep down he wasn't ready, or willing." He ran a hand through his silver hair, sighing deeply. "But I see now that I've been wrong. You've worked harder than anyone, Catherine. You've earned everything you have, and I failed to recognize that. I failed you." I blinked, unsure how to respond. This was the man who had spent years dismissing my ambition, telling me to settle for a life that didn't match my dreams. And now he was standing here, admitting he was wrong. "Why now?" I finally asked, my voice steady but cautious. "Why are you telling me this now, after everything that's happened?" He met my gaze, his blue eyes filled with an honesty I hadn't seen before. "Because I saw what you're capable of," he said simply. "And I realized I've been a fool. Grant isn't ready, and he may never be. But you've proven you have what it takes, not just to succeed, but to lead." He stepped closer, his tone almost pleading. "Catherine, I'm asking you to come back, to take your rightful place at Mercer and Associates. The firm needs you. I need you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long fighting for this moment, dreaming of hearing those words from him. But now that they were here, I wasn't sure if I wanted them. "What about Grant?" I asked finally. "What happens to him?" My father's face tightened, and he nodded slowly. "Grant will stay, but he'll take on a role more suited to his skills. This is about you, Catherine. It's about giving you what you've always deserved." I took a deep breath, letting his words settle for a moment. "I need time to think about this," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "It's not something I can decide right away. A lot has happened, and I need a few days to figure out what's best for me." My father nodded, his expression serious but understanding. "Of course," he said. "Take all the time you need. I'm not asking for an answer today. I just needed to say my piece." He moved toward the door, but before he left, he turned back to face me. "Catherine," he said, his tone softer now. "I know I haven't said this enough, or maybe ever, but I am proud of you. Watching you in that courtroom, you were better than I ever was, better than I could have imagined." His words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment I just stared at him, unsure of how to respond. He gave me a small, almost hesitant smile before turning and walking out of the office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I sat at my desk, his words echoed in my mind, "Better than I ever was." For so long I had fought to prove myself to him, to show that I was more than just his daughter, that I was capable, strong, and deserving of respect. And now, hearing those words, I felt a surge of pride that I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about him anymore. I was proud of myself, for standing my ground, for thriving on my own, and for showing the world, and my father, exactly what I was capable of. Now it's late at night, and I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what to do. My father's offer is everything I've worked for, everything I thought I wanted. But going back would mean stepping into a world where I was once dismissed, where I'd have to navigate the shadows of old wounds and fractured trust. It would mean working alongside Grant, knowing how little he values what we both stand to represent. And yet, staying where I am has its own challenges. This firm has been good to me, and I've grown here in ways I never imagined. But it's not my legacy. It's not Mercer and Associates, the place I dreamed of running since I was a little girl. If I go back, I'd have a chance to shape that legacy on my terms, to prove that the name belongs to me just as much as anyone else. I haven't made up my mind yet. The choice feels impossible, and the weight of it keeps me awake. But maybe you can help. What would you do in my situation? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Hey there! Did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot and makes sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. "I'm not asking for a favor, Rachel," my dad said, his voice colder than I remembered. "I'm asking you to do your job." The words stung more than I expected. For a moment, I couldn't respond. I sat there gripping the edge of my desk, staring at the man who hadn't been a part of my life for over 20 years. His expression was hard, his tone even harder, and I couldn't decide if it was anger or desperation I heard in his voice. "My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 31 years old, a defense lawyer with a solid career, and a single woman focused on her work. For as long as I can remember, my relationship with my dad has been defined by his absence. He left when I was 9, walking away from my mom and me without so much as a goodbye. Now, 2 decades later, he was sitting across from me, asking for my help. No, kind of demanding it, and I didn't know how to feel. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my thoughts. "You're asking me to defend you in court," I said, keeping my voice even. "But let's not pretend this is just about me doing my job. You need my help, Dad. And after everything, you think you can just walk in here and demand it?" He shifted uncomfortably, but didn't look away. "This isn't personal, Rachel. It's business. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you were the best option." Business. Of course he would frame it that way. My dad had always been about transactions, what people could do for him, what he could get in return. Still, I couldn't ignore the flicker of something else in his voice. Was it guilt? Regret? I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to care. "I need to think about it," I said finally, my voice firmer than I felt. "If you'll excuse me, I have other clients waiting." He nodded stiffly and stood, smoothing his suit jacket. "Take your time," he said, though his tone implied the opposite. "But remember, Rachel, I'm fighting for my life here." As soon as he walked out, the tension in the room lingered. I stared at the empty chair he'd just vacated, my thoughts a mess. It wasn't the first time I'd faced a challenging case, but this wasn't just about legal strategy. This was him, the man who left my mom struggling to pay bills, who missed every milestone in my life, and who had been a ghost until now. That night, I called Jessica, my mentor and the closest thing I had to a maternal figure since my mom passed. "He just showed up out of nowhere, Jess," I said, pacing my apartment. Like he had every right to ask me for help. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he did, just, "I need you." Jessica sighed on the other end of the line. "Rachel, this is tough, but you're a lawyer first. The question is, can you separate your personal feelings from the professional obligation?" I stopped pacing and stared out the window at the city lights. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not sure I have a choice." Over the next couple of days, I buried myself in the case file my dad had left behind. It was a mess. He was being accused of embezzling millions from his company, Monroe Investments, and the evidence wasn't exactly in his favor. Bank transfers, falsified reports, and discrepancies in financial records, it all pointed to him. If I took this case, I'd be fighting an uphill battle. But the more I read, the more something felt off. The transactions were too calculated, too clean for my dad. He'd always been impulsive, not the kind of man to pull off something this meticulous. That's when I started digging into his business partner, Alan Carter. His name popped up in a few key documents, and the more I looked, the more I realized he stood to gain if my dad took the fall. I wasn't sure what to do with that information yet, but it planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. Late one night, after hours of poring over documents, I called Jessica again. "This case doesn't add up," I told her. "I think someone set him up. Maybe his partner, Alan." Jessica was quiet for a moment before she replied, "Rachel, if that's true, you're not just defending your father. You're exposing a deeper issue. Are you ready for what that means?" I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I don't know if I'm ready, Jess, but I think I have to do this." The next morning, I made my decision. I called my dad and told him I'd take the case, but under one condition, I was running it my way. No interference, no half-truths. To my surprise, he agreed without argument, though I could hear the tension in his voice. Maybe he knew how serious this was, or maybe he realized he didn't have any other options. Preparing for the first hearing was overwhelming. I had to comb through years of financial records, interview employees, and piece together a narrative that didn't make my dad look like a criminal. All the while, I wrestled with my own feelings. Defending him wasn't just about the case. It felt like stepping into a minefield of unresolved anger and hurt. But I kept telling myself this wasn't personal. This was about doing my job and uncovering the truth. The first time we met in my office to prepare, the tension was thick. He sat across from me, his body language closed off, but his eyes occasionally softened when he thought I wasn't looking. I kept it professional, walking him through the strategy and what I needed from him. But at one point, he broke the silence. "You're good at this," he said, almost reluctantly. I didn't expect this level of competence. I froze for a moment, unsure whether to take it as a compliment or an insult. "I've been doing this for a long time," I replied evenly. "It's what I do." He nodded but didn't say anything else, and just like that, we were back to business. As the weeks went by, the case started to come together, though not without its challenges. Alan Carter, my dad's business partner, was slippery. His deposition was filled with carefully worded statements that hinted at my dad's guilt, while conveniently glossing over his own involvement. I could feel the pressure mounting, both in the courtroom and in my personal life. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I sat down with Jessica over coffee. "He's not an easy client," I admitted. "Half the time it feels like he's holding something back. The other half, he seems genuinely desperate." Jessica sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "That's the thing about family," she said. "They're not just clients. They're a mirror. Every conversation, every argument, it's all tangled up with years of history. But you're doing the right thing, Rachel. You're getting to the truth." Her words stayed with me as we moved closer to the trial date. The more I worked on the case, the more I realized how much was at stake, not just for my dad, but for me. This wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above the past and handle this with integrity. During one of our late-night meetings, the tension finally boiled over. We were reviewing a timeline of transactions when I noticed my dad staring out the window, his attention miles away. "Something on your mind?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just thinking." I set my pen down and leaned back in my chair. "Thinking about what? How you ended up here? Or is it about how you left me and Mom when I was a kid?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't try to soften them. For a moment he looked taken aback, as if I'd hit a nerve he wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Rachel, he started, but I wasn't about to let him dodge this. "No," I interrupted. "We're not brushing past this. You walked out on us, and you never came back. Do you have any idea what that did to Mom? What it did to me? And now you show up in my life. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but because you need something. Do you even care?" His face tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might get defensive. But instead, he sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't have an excuse. I made mistakes, big ones. And the truth is, I didn't think I had the right to come back after everything." His admission caught me off guard. I had spent years imagining what I'd say to him if I ever got the chance, but I never expected him to admit fault so openly. "You didn't even try," I said, my voice trembling. "You left us to pick up the pieces." He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the window. "And I regret it every single day." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't understand why I took your case in the first place," I said, my voice laced with frustration. "After everything you've done, or really haven't done, why am I here helping you?" He paused, his gaze fixed on the papers scattered across the table. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of regret and something that looked almost like admiration. "Maybe it's because you're a better person than I am," he said softly. I stared at him, taken aback. "That's not an answer," I snapped, though his words had thrown me off balance. "I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm doing my job." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe that's part of it. But the truth is, Rachel, you've got something I never had. Integrity. You could have walked away. You had every right to. But you didn't. Because you have something I lost a long time ago. You actually care about doing the right thing, even when it's hard." I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. "No integrity? Are you saying you're guilty of this case too?" My voice was sharp, cutting through the tense silence. His expression hardened instantly. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "I didn't do what they're accusing me of, Rachel. I might have made bad decisions in my life, plenty of them, but I didn't steal from my own company. I'm not a thief." I studied him closely, trying to read his face. There was something about his tone, an edge of desperation, that made me believe him, at least in that moment. But the past had left me with too much doubt to fully trust him. "Then why does the evidence point straight to you?" I asked. "The transfers, the falsified records, all of it leads back to your name." "That's what I'm trying to figure out," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "And that's why I need you. Someone set me up, Rachel. I know how it looks, but I didn't do this." For a brief second, I felt a flicker of pity for him, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "You better hope I can prove that," I said, standing up, "because if you're lying, I'm not going to cover for you." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the case, determined to uncover the truth. Alan Carter's name kept coming up in the records, his involvement just subtle enough to escape notice unless you were really looking. It was clear he had positioned himself to benefit from my dad's downfall, but I needed more than suspicions. I needed hard evidence. During one of our strategy meetings, I laid everything out on the table. Alan had access to the accounts, the records, everything, I explained, pointing to the timeline I'd constructed. He's been distancing himself from this company for months, quietly liquidating assets and transferring them to his private holdings. If we can prove he had motive and opportunity, we can shift the focus away from you. My dad listened intently, a rare moment of silence from a man who usually had something to say. "Do you really think he's behind all this?" he asked, his voice cautious. "I do," I replied. "But it's not about what I think, it's about what I can prove. And if Alan is as smart as he seems, he's covered his tracks well. It's going to take more than circumstantial evidence to clear your name." The turning point came during a pre-trial deposition. One of Alan Carter's employees, a senior manager named Ellen Price, was called in to provide testimony. At first, her answers were routine, calm, composed, and not particularly revealing. But as I pressed her about the financial discrepancies and Alan's involvement, I noticed her demeanor shift. She started glancing toward the door, her voice faltering ever so slightly. Finally, I decided to take a chance. "Ms. Price," I said, my tone firm but not accusatory, "is there anything you'd like to share about Mr. Carter's role in this situation? Anything you might have overheard or witnessed that could provide clarity?" She hesitated, visibly torn. The room was silent, save for the faint scratching of the court stenographer's pen. Then, with a deep breath, she said, "There was a phone call, a couple of months ago. I overheard Mr. Carter saying, 'Michael is the perfect scapegoat.'" Her words were barely above a whisper, but they hit like a thunderclap. I exchanged a quick glance with my co-counsel. "Did you report this at the time?" I asked. Ellen shook her head. "No, I didn't think it was my place, but it's been bothering me ever since. I didn't know if it was relevant until now." While her testimony was a crucial breakthrough, I knew it wasn't enough on its own. We needed something concrete, material proof to back her claims. Without it, Alan could easily argue that her account was hearsay or a misinterpretation. I thanked her for her honesty, promising to follow up. Later that evening, I went over the deposition with our IT investigator, who had been combing through digital records for weeks. "We're close," he said, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop screen. "I've been sifting through old email archives, and there are still a few backup files I haven't finished scanning. If Alan left a trail, it's going to be in there." The waiting felt endless, but I held on to the hope that somewhere in the digital dust of Alan's emails was the proof we needed to expose the truth. 2 days later, just as I was beginning to lose hope, the call came. It was our IT investigator, his tone brimming with urgency. "Rachel, I found it," he said. I sat up straighter in my chair. "Found what?" "An email Alan sent to an external accountant," he explained. "It's vague, but he clearly references shifting the blame to your father. He deleted it, but the backup archives preserved a copy. The timestamp lines up perfectly with the period when the financial discrepancies started." My pulse quickened. "What exactly does it say?" He read it aloud. "The way things are structured, Michael will take the fall if this goes south. Keep everything tight on your end." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "It's not just a mistake, Rachel. It's deliberate." I exhaled, relief washing over me. This is it. This is the proof we need. He wasn't done. I also cross-checked the IP address from which the email was sent. It matches Alan's office computer. There's no plausible way he can deny it came from him. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the notes on my desk. Between Ellen's testimony and this email, the puzzle pieces were finally coming together. I had the tools to not only clear my dad's name, but also bring Alan's deceit into the light. The next step was presenting it in court. As much as I wanted to celebrate the breakthrough, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The day of the court presentation arrived, and the weight of the case pressed down on me as I walked into the courtroom. My dad sat next to me, uncharacteristically quiet, his face a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I placed the folder containing the email and deposition notes on the table in front of me, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. As the proceedings began, the opposing counsel tried to paint my dad as reckless and untrustworthy, a man whose carelessness had jeopardized his company. But I stayed calm, biding my time until it was my turn to present the evidence. When the judge called on me, I rose, holding the email copy in my hand. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "we have new evidence that sheds light on this case. It directly implicates Alan Carter in a deliberate attempt to frame my client." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as I handed copies of the email to the judge and opposing counsel. "This email," I continued, "was retrieved from a backup server after Mr. Carter attempted to delete it. In it, he clearly outlines a plan to shift blame onto my client, Michael Monroe, should the financial discrepancies come under scrutiny." I let the room absorb the gravity of the evidence before adding, "Furthermore, we have corroborating testimony from an employee who overheard Mr. Carter referring to my client as the perfect scapegoat." The judge nodded, signaling for me to continue. "This isn't a case of negligence or incompetence on my client's part. This is a calculated effort by Mr. Carter to cover his tracks and deflect responsibility." For the first time during the trial, I saw Alan's composure crack. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing nervously at his attorney. My dad, on the other hand, looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years: respect. As the judge reviewed the evidence and listened to closing arguments, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. I kept my focus on the judge's expression, searching for any sign of where things might be headed. When the gavel finally struck, signaling an adjournment, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "The court finds sufficient grounds to shift its focus to the allegations against Mr. Alan Carter," the judge declared. "The trial concerning Michael Monroe is adjourned indefinitely, pending further investigation of the new evidence provided." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. My dad turned to me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he looked like he might say something, but he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded, as if acknowledging everything I'd done. In the days that followed, the charges against my dad were formally dismissed. The focus shifted entirely to Alan, who quickly found himself at the center of a full-blown investigation. The media caught wind of the story, and headlines about Alan's alleged misconduct dominated the news. For the first time, my dad was free of the cloud of suspicion that had hung over him for months. But for me, the victory felt complicated. Clearing his name had been my goal, but it also brought back memories and emotions I wasn't prepared to deal with. The evening after the charges were dismissed, my dad and I met in my office. He had asked for a meeting, his tone uncharacteristically soft when he called. As he walked in, I noticed how different he looked, less guarded, almost vulnerable. He took a seat across from me, the silence stretching as he seemed to search for the right words. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice low, "for everything you've done. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'm grateful." I leaned back, folding my arms. "You don't have to thank me. I did what I was supposed to do as your lawyer." He flinched slightly at my tone, but he nodded. "You were more than just my lawyer. You saved my life, Rachel. And you did it despite everything I put you through. I didn't deserve that kind of loyalty." I studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. "It wasn't loyalty," I said finally. "It was about doing what was right. And honestly, it wasn't for you. It was for me. To prove that I could rise above all the things you failed to be." His shoulders slumped, the weight of my words settling over him. "I wish I could change the past," he said quietly. "I wish I'd been there for you and your mom, but I can't. All I can do is tell you how proud I am of the person you've become, even if I didn't have a hand in it." For a moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Sympathy. But it didn't erase the years of absence and pain. "I don't need your pride," I said, my voice steady. "I needed a father, and I didn't have one when it mattered most." He nodded, unable to argue. "I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." I didn't respond, letting the silence speak for itself. I didn't forgive him. At least, not then. Maybe I never will. Some wounds run too deep, and no amount of apologies can erase the scars they leave behind. But as I sat there, watching my father grapple with the weight of his mistakes, I realized something important. I didn't need his approval or his pride. What I needed was to prove to myself that I could rise above the pain, the abandonment, and the doubt. And I had. I cleared his name, uncovered the truth, and showed him the person that I was. As he left my office that day, I stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. I wasn't the little girl he had walked away from anymore. I was Rachel Monroe, a woman who had fought for her own worth, and I felt proud of myself. Hey there, did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot and makes sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
I swallowed the last of the painkillers, feeling the familiar lump in my throat. My husband, Adrian, his gaze fixed on the pill bottle, spoke in a tone dripping with impatience. "You've taken your meds, Eliza. No more excuses, right? Get on with the vacuuming." I winced, not just from the physical pain of my endometriosis, but from the sting of his words. "Just give it a moment to kick in. I'll clean up properly, Adrian." His response was a deep, exaggerated sigh, the kind that made me feel like a burden. As I struggled to suppress my own sigh, a sudden, sharp pain shot through my back. Collapsing to the floor, I looked up in disbelief to see Adrian, standing over me with a sneer. "Stop with your menstrual cramp theatrics, Eliza. Just get the job done." His voice was as cold as the floor I lay on. I, Eliza, at 32, found myself trapped in a marriage that had turned from a dream into a nightmare. Adrian and I met at the sales company where we both worked. He was the star salesman, known for his charm and quick wit. I was the newbie, eager and admiring. His mentorship turned into friendship, then into love, or so I thought. Our marriage began like a fairy tale, but as time passed, my health condition became a wedge between us. Endometriosis wasn't new to me, but Adrian's attitude towards it was. Initially, he was understanding, even caring. But after marriage, his empathy faded like mist in the morning sun. His disdain wasn't limited to my health issues. Adrian's career took off, and with that came arrogance. We both contributed to our household, but he made significantly more, and he never let me forget it. My efforts around the house were invisible to him. His eyes only saw the moments I spent resting, never the hours of pain-filled labor. When we moved to a new house, a step forward in our life together, his true colors bled through even more. He decided to host a family gathering to show off our new home. He handed me the list of guests, a mix of relatives, each with their own dietary preferences and dislikes. "Make sure everyone's happy, Eliza. No shortcuts, no excuses." I spent nights planning the menu, juggling the contrasting tastes and preferences. On the eve of the party, with my period in full swing, I managed to decorate the house and prep the food, all the while fighting back tears of pain and frustration. Adrian, oblivious to my struggles, spent the evening laughing at some show on TV, glass in hand, as I labored in the kitchen. I collapsed into bed that night, exhausted, hoping for a few hours of rest before the storm. The morning of the party, I was up before dawn, cooking and setting everything in place. The pain was relentless, but I pushed through, glancing at the clock, racing against time. I managed to set up everything just as the painkillers began to wear off, their effect fading like a mirage in the desert. Sitting gingerly on the sofa, trying to catch my breath, I glanced at Adrian. He sat there, casually sipping his drink, eyes glued to the TV. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He noticed my stare and turned to me, annoyance etched on his face. "What now, Eliza? Telling me I can't have a drink in my own house?" I shook my head, words still trapped. I just need a moment. The party, it's all set." He stood up, his movements deliberate, menacing. "You're always just needing a moment, aren't you? Playing the victim over a little stomach ache. My mother never acted like you do." His words were like daggers, each one piercing deeper. As I tried to defend myself, explaining that everything was ready, that I was just taking a brief respite, he cut me off. "No more of your excuses. I'm tired of them." And then, without warning, he kicked me. sending me tumbling off the sofa. The physical pain was sharp, but the shock of his action left me numb. I lay there, trying to process what had just happened, as he calmly sat down and started playing a game on his phone, laughing at his screen as if nothing had happened. I was still on the floor, trying to gather my strength to stand, when the doorbell rang. Our guests had arrived. With every ounce of willpower, I pushed myself up and plastered a smile on my face. The day had just begun. As I opened the door, the bright smiles of the arriving relatives clashed starkly with the turmoil within me. Their cheerful greetings and compliments on the house felt surreal, a stark contrast to the pain and humiliation I had just experienced. During the gathering, I moved like an automaton, serving dishes and smiling through clenched teeth. Adrian played the gracious host, charming and witty, a stark contrast to the monster I had seen just moments before. The mask he wore was impeccable, hiding his true nature from the world. Amidst the facade of normalcy, I caught sight of Martin, Adrian's father, standing in the doorway, observing the scene with a frown. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of concern. He had always been a stern man, a strict father to Adrian, but today his usual sternness seemed tinged with something else. Disappointment, maybe even disgust. As the party continued, Adrian's demeanor grew increasingly jovial with each drink. His laughter was too loud, his gestures too grand. It was a performance, a show put on for the benefit of others. I knew the real Adrian, the one who lurked behind those smiles and charming words. The turning point came unexpectedly. I was in the kitchen, taking a moment to brace myself against the counter, when I heard raised voices from the living room. Peering out, I saw Martin confronting Adrian, his voice booming over the murmur of the guests. "What do you think you're doing, Adrian? I saw how you treated Eliza earlier. Is that how a man behaves? Is that how I raised you?" Adrian, caught off guard, tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Dad, it's nothing. Just a little spat between husband and wife. You know how it is." Martin's face reddened with anger. "A little spat? I saw you kick her, Adrian. That's not how you treat your wife, or any woman for that matter." The room fell silent, all eyes now on the father and son. Adrian's mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man I knew too well. "She was just being lazy, Dad. You know how women can be, making a big deal out of nothing. I was just helping her get back on track." His words sent a wave of shock through the room. The relatives looked at each other, disbelief and discomfort written on their faces. Martin stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "Helping her? By kicking her? Is that what you call help? That's abuse, Adrian. You're abusing your wife." The word abuse hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Adrian's face twisted in anger, but before he could respond, Martin continued. "Your mother would be ashamed to see the man you've become. I'm ashamed. You're my son, but I won't stand by and watch you treat your wife like this." Adrian, now visibly shaken, tried to regain his composure. "Dad, you're overreacting. It's not like I hit her or anything. It was just a kick, a wake-up call." Martin's response was immediate and furious. "A wake-up call? You think physical violence is a wake-up call? That's where you're wrong, son. That's where you've lost your way." The confrontation escalated, with Martin denouncing Adrian's behavior in front of everyone. The family gathering, meant to be a celebration, had turned into a public airing of our private nightmare. As Martin stormed out of the room, followed by a few relatives, Adrian turned to me, his eyes searching for an ally. But I couldn't meet his gaze. I felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely liberated. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Guests left early, murmuring their goodbyes and casting sympathetic glances my way. Adrian, now subdued, sat silently, the weight of his father's words and the guests' judgment pressing down on him. That night, as I lay in bed, my body aching, my mind raced. The events of the day had shattered the fragile facade of our marriage. Adrian's true nature was revealed, not just to me, but to everyone. The mask had slipped, and the monster was exposed for all to see. The morning after the party, the house was silent, a stark contrast to the previous day's chaos. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, lost in thought. The events of yesterday replayed in my mind, each word, each look, cutting deeper than before. Adrian had left early, muttering something about clearing his head. The house felt different without his looming presence. Quieter, but not necessarily more peaceful. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Martin. He stood there, a mix of anger and sorrow in his eyes. "May I come in, Eliza?" His voice was softer than I had ever heard it. I nodded, leading him into the living room. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. "I can't begin to express how sorry I am for what happened yesterday, for what my son did to you." His apology was sincere, but it did little to ease the turmoil inside me. "Thank you, Martin, but apologies won't change what happened." He nodded, his face lined with regret. "I know, and that's what I'm here to talk about. You see, Adrian's behavior, it didn't come out of nowhere. It's my fault, partly." I looked at him, surprised. Martin, always so stern and unyielding, was admitting fault. "When I was younger, I wasn't the best husband to Adrian's mother. I was tough, demanding. I believed in discipline and keeping a tight ship. I thought I was doing right by my family, but I was wrong, so very wrong." His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw the man behind the facade, a man full of regrets. Adrian grew up watching me, learning from me. I thought I was teaching him to be strong, to be a man, but all I taught him was how to be hard, how to be cold. The revelation was a shock. I had always seen Martin as the unshakable patriarch, never questioning his methods or his influence. "Martin, you can't blame yourself for Adrian's actions. He's an adult. He makes his own choices." Martin shook his head. "That's just it, Eliza. We're all products of our upbringing, to some extent. I set a bad example, and Adrian followed it. I've realized that too late." There was a long pause before he continued. "But that's not all. I'm here to tell you that you don't have to endure this. You have a choice, Eliza. You can leave Adrian, and I'll support you, financially, legally, whatever you need." His offer took me by surprise. Leave Adrian? The thought had crossed my mind more than once, but the reality of it was overwhelming. "Martin, I need to think about this. It's not just a decision, it's my life." "I understand," he said, standing up. "But remember, you're not alone. You have options, and whatever you decide, I'll be there for you." As he left, I sat there, the weight of his words heavy on my shoulders. The option to leave, to start over, was tempting, but it was also terrifying. What would life be like without Adrian, without the marriage I had invested so much in? The rest of the day passed in a blur of thoughts and emotions. I was angry, hurt, confused, but above all, I was tired. Tired of the pain, the lies, the facade. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. I would leave Adrian. I would start over. It would be hard, maybe the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I owed it to myself to try. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. I began to untangle myself from the life I had built with Adrian. Each step was difficult, but Martin's support made it bearable. He helped me find a lawyer and even offered financial assistance, though I declined the latter. Adrian returned home after a few days. His demeanor changed. He was quieter, more contemplative. It seemed the confrontation with his father had shaken him. "Eliza, we need to talk," he said one evening, his voice lacking its usual harshness. I braced myself. "All right, let's talk." He took a deep breath. "I've been doing some thinking. About us, about my behavior. I'm sorry, Eliza, for everything." His apology, though unexpected, didn't erase the pain he had caused. "Sorry doesn't change what happened, Adrian. I know, and I don't expect it to, but I want to make things right. I want to change." His words were a surprise, but I was skeptical. Could a person really change so drastically overnight? "Change isn't easy, Adrian. It takes more than just wanting it. I'm willing to try. I've even started seeing a therapist. I want to be better, for us." The revelation was shocking. Adrian, seeking therapy? It was a step I never thought he'd take. "I'm glad you're seeking help, Adrian, but it doesn't change my decision. I need time and space to heal, to figure out what I want." The hurt in his eyes was evident, but there was also a glimmer of understanding. "I get it. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying." As the days passed, Adrian's attempts to change were apparent. He was gentler, more considerate, but the scars he had left were too deep, and my decision remained firm. The day I moved out was filled with a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, fear, and hope. Adrian didn't stop me. He just stood there, watching silently as I left our home for the last time. Living alone was a new experience. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom, a sense of control over my life. I could breathe, think, and heal without the shadow of Adrian looming over me. But freedom came with its own challenges. I had to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage, redefine my identity. It was daunting, but also exhilarating. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, the doorbell rang. It was Martin. He stood there, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "Eliza, I need to talk to you. It's about Adrian." I let him in, curious about what he had to say. "Adrian's been doing well in therapy. He's making progress, but he's also struggling. He misses you, Eliza. He wants to make things right." I listened, feeling a mix of emotions: pity, anger, indifference. "Martin, I appreciate what you're doing, but I can't go back. Not now, maybe not ever." "I understand," he said softly, "but he's my son. I had to try." As he left, I felt a sense of finality. My life with Adrian was over, and a new chapter was beginning. A chapter where I was in control, where I could write my own story. Life in my new apartment brought a sense of tranquility I hadn't felt in years. The days were mine to fill, the space mine to inhabit without fear or judgment. I found solace in the small things, the quiet mornings, the freedom to make my own decisions, the absence of Adrian's oppressive presence. But this newfound freedom also brought with it a need for introspection. I began to revisit my past, the choices I made, the signs I ignored. In the silence of my apartment, I confronted the reality of my marriage, the manipulation, the emotional abuse, and the deep-seated fear that had become a constant companion. One afternoon, as I sifted through old photos, a wave of anger washed over me. The smiling faces in the pictures were a stark contrast to the memories they now evoked. How had I let myself be treated that way? How had I stayed for so long? It was then that I realized my journey wasn't just about healing. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice. I wanted Adrian to understand the depth of the pain he had caused, to experience the consequences of his actions. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. The line rang, and then a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Eliza? Is that you?" It was Adrian's sister, Clara. We had been close once, before everything fell apart. "Clara, hi. It's been a while. I wanted to talk to you about something." Her voice was cautious. "Of course, Eliza. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath. "I want to tell my story, Clara. I want people to know what happened, what Adrian did." There was a pause on the other end. "Eliza, are you sure? That's a big step, I'm sure. It's time people knew the truth. I'm tired of hiding, of pretending everything was fine." Clara's response was supportive, yet concerned. "Okay, I'm here for you. Whatever you need." I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. I knew that speaking out would be difficult, that it would bring judgment and possibly backlash. But I also knew it was necessary, for my own healing and for the possibility of holding Adrian accountable. In the weeks that followed, I shared my story. First with friends, then in a local support group, and finally in a blog post that Clara helped me publish. The post detailed everything: the abuse, the manipulation, the fear. It was raw, honest, and unflinching. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in, along with stories from other women who had experienced similar ordeals. But there were also those who doubted, who questioned my motives, who stood by Adrian. Adrian's reaction was a mix of shock and anger. He called me, his voice shaking with emotion. "Eliza, why did you do this? Why are you trying to destroy me?" I felt a surge of empowerment. "I'm not trying to destroy you, Adrian. I'm trying to heal. And part of that healing is speaking my truth." His pleas turned to threats, to bargaining, but I stood firm. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to be silenced again. As the days passed, the impact of my revelation became apparent. Adrian's reputation suffered, his once charming facade now tainted by the truth of his actions. His friends began to distance themselves, and at work, he faced scrutiny and distrust. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about breaking the cycle of abuse. I had taken back control, not just of my life, but of my narrative. And in doing so, I had exposed Adrian for who he truly was. Several months had passed since I shared my story. The fallout for Adrian had been significant. His social circle had shrunk, and his professional life had taken a hit. But for me, it was a time of rebuilding and rediscovery. I had started therapy, which helped me process my past and envision a future that was mine to shape. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat wrapped in a blanket on my balcony, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Adrian. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. "Eliza, can we meet? I need to talk to you. Please. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe the next day. Sitting across from Adrian in the cafe, I noticed the changes in him. He looked older, warier. The arrogance that once defined him seemed to have dissipated. "Eliza, thank you for coming," he began, his voice unsteady. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of therapy, and I realize now how much harm I've caused you." His words were a stark contrast to the man I had known. "Adrian, words are one thing, actions are another. What do you want from me?" He sighed, looking down at his hands. "I don't expect forgiveness or for you to come back. I just wanted to apologize, truly apologize, and to tell you that I'm working on myself, trying to be a better person." The sincerity in his voice was unexpected, but it didn't erase the past. "That's good to hear, Adrian, but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that I've moved on." He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I know, and I'm happy for you, truly. I just hope that one day you can look back and see that I'm not the same person I was." The conversation was a strange mix of closure and revelation. As we parted ways, a part of me felt lighter, while another part remained cautious, wary of the man he once was and might still be. Returning to my apartment, I reflected on the encounter. Adrian's apology, his apparent change, it was more than I had expected. But it didn't alter the course I was on. My journey was my own now, no longer tied to him or his redemption. Days turned into weeks, and life settled into a new rhythm. My blog had become a platform for discussion and support, connecting me with a community of people who shared similar experiences. My story had struck a chord, and in sharing it, I had found purpose and strength. Adrian, meanwhile, continued his therapy and reportedly made strides in changing his behavior. Rumors reached me through mutual acquaintances. Some expressed skepticism, others noted genuine improvements. But to me, Adrian's journey was no longer my concern. My focus was on my path, my healing. As I lay in bed one night, a realization dawned on me. In seeking justice, in speaking my truth, I had not only exposed Adrian, but freed myself from the chains of our toxic relationship. The pain he had caused was still a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had found my voice, my strength, and with that, I had found a new beginning, a new chapter where I was the author, and the story was mine to write. Months had passed since my last encounter with Adrian. My life had taken on a new shape, filled with possibilities and free from the shadows of my past. I had immersed myself in new activities, met new people, and even started dating again, cautiously, but with a renewed sense of hope. One rainy afternoon, as I sat in my living room, the familiar chime of an email notification broke the silence. It was from Adrian. My heart raced as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. "Eliza, I know you've moved on, and I'm trying to do the same. I'm leaving town, starting fresh in a new city. Before I go, I wanted to thank you. Thank you for opening my eyes to the pain I caused, not just to you, but to myself. I'm sorry for everything, and I hope one day you can truly forgive me. Adrian." The email was a surprise, a final acknowledgement of the change he had promised. I sat there, staring at the screen, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Adrian leaving town felt like the closing of a chapter, a final severing of the ties that bound us. I replied with a simple message. "Thank you for the apology, Adrian. I wish you well in your new life." Hitting send felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was an act of closure, of letting go of the past and embracing the future. The weeks that followed were a testament to the change in my life. My blog had grown into a small community of support and empowerment. I had started writing a book about my experiences, hoping to inspire others who might be in similar situations. One evening, as I sat at my desk, the phone rang. It was Clara, Adrian's sister. "Eliza, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. You've turned something terrible into something positive. You're an inspiration." Her words warmed my heart. "Thank you, Clara. It means a lot coming from you." As we talked, I realized how far I had come. From a victim of abuse to a voice of empowerment. My story had not only helped me heal, but had also touched the lives of others. Clara's call ended with an invitation to a family gathering. I hesitated at first, but then accepted. It was a chance to reconnect with those who had been a part of my life, to show them the person I had become. The gathering was a bittersweet reunion. There were moments of awkwardness, but also moments of genuine connection. I realized that while my relationship with Adrian was over, my relationships with others in his family didn't have to be. As I drove home that evening, the city lights reflecting in the rain-soaked streets, I felt a sense of peace. The journey I had embarked on had been long and challenging, but it had led me to a place of strength and self-discovery. My story was one of many, a single thread in the tapestry of life, but it was a thread woven with resilience, courage, and hope, a testament to the power of speaking out, of standing up for oneself. I had found my voice in the darkness, and in doing so, I had found the light. And with that light, I stepped forward into a new dawn, ready to write the next chapter of my life.